Good morning, guys. This side Rahul Magan is Group Chief Executive Officer, Treasury Consulting, and also a venture capitalist. The video shot 3rd September 2020. If I speak about the global perspective, then there are many news that are currently in the newspapers. In order of importance, the number one is the Trump versus the Biden. Who will win? Very difficult. And where Treasury Consulting is, I will not tell you. And secondly is definitely the oil sector, which is facing too much heat. If I strictly speak from an Indian angle, then two issues that are there in the newspapers is one, GST, and second is the World Bank rankings. One of the preliminary reasons why GST was introduced, because instead of having multiple tax rates, we should have one tax rate. That I agree. But did we end it up as a first tax rate, only one tax rate? That is always a question, and you know the answer. As a country, we are having multiple tax rates which create confusion. Rather, chartered accountants came in the public domain and they criticize that every week we are getting different circular of the GST, which is keeping them busy what to do now. Now the decision of the central government giving two options to the state government is raising lot of concern. I'm not talking about that there are 5 or 7 state governments, those who are against that move because they are non-BJP denominated. I'm not talking whether the other state governments go into the favor of that, because irrespective favor or against, we should talk about the fundamental facts. The biggest issue that I always pointed is that a clause in the GST which suggests that the tax revenue growth would be around 14%. 14% is a very huge increment. I really doubt any private sector concern even give 14 sector even to the CEO of his organization as a salary growth nowadays. Expecting 14% growth in the tax revenue on year-on-year basis, at least for the first 5 years, is something which is extremely high optimist assumption. GST shortfall is there. That is a different thing, that the GDP contraction of 24% is always subject to criticism because the informal sector data is completely not on the table. And extrapolating informal sector to the tune of the formal sector is always subject to interpretation issue. So one thing is pretty sure, that the contraction of 24% is not the only thing. Rather, in the upcoming quarters, the more contraction is there. And by the way, contraction or no contraction, the ground reality is there before us. So we cannot run away from the ground reality. But in this week, the center has given two options to the state for the GST. Definitely the first, states can borrow 97,000 crores from the central bank. This is the loss occurring from implementation of the GST. Central will not fund the rest of the losses as it is attributable to the COVID fallout, so not covered under compensation pact. This is case 1. Case 2, state governments will be allowed to borrow around 2.35 trillion, which is around 2,35,000 crores. By the way, one of the biggest reasons that I always faced from this 2.35 trillion number, which is the herd bias. I don't know you know the meaning of the herd bias or not, but the meaning of the herd bias is that if one newspaper published an article, the other newspapers published almost similar kind of articles. I tried very hard to get the composition of this 2.35 trillion state-wise. Example, Delhi is this, Maharashtra is this, West Bengal is this, and all the states. So the total states around 32, 31, and the total 2.35 trillion. That I never got. Now you must be thinking why I was working for that. I was working for that because I wanted to understand which states will borrow to the what extent, because from Bloomberg terminal I can see that state is having how much gross debt. So I'm just quoting a hypothetical example. Example Maharashtra. Assuming. Assuming out of this 2.35 trillion, which is 2,35,000 crore, Maharashtra amount is 35,000 crore. Assuming. From Bloomberg, I can see that Maharashtra total gross debt is currently say 1 lakh crore, assuming. And adding 35,000 crore will add to the tune of Maharashtra. So I can compute debt to GDP ratio of Maharashtra. But getting this $2.35 trillion composition is something which is finding a star in the galaxy, at least to me. So that I do not know. But in either case, if states will go for either of the cases, option 1 or option 2, there are 4 reasons that matters. Number 1. If I, state A, will go for RBI, from where RBI will borrow? Is it RBI is going to pay from his pocket? Or is it RBI will borrow from the market? And even if RBI will borrow from the market, it is not free. And this creates crowding out. Because of COVID-19, the surplus into the system is reducing at a much faster pace. By surplus, I mean to say savings. And since these savings are reducing at a much faster pace, it is very, very difficult for government to borrow more because savings are very less. And since savings are very less, additional 97,000 crores by RBI is something, And guys, if I go to the second option, 2.35 trillion, which is 2,35,000 crore, then this is like hell lot of money. And the concern is not that, rather the concern starts from here, which is that cash-strapped states could borrow from Reserve Bank of India to cover their shortfall in GST collection, with the Federal Indirect Tax Body, the GST Council, on Thursday agreeing that states' revenue loss needs to be compensated. While the consensus in the council was that states' revenue shortfall is to be met, the modalities for doing so witness clashes, with opposition-ruled states expressing disappointment about having to borrow from RBI rather than getting upfront from the center. To repay the borrowing, the cess levied on the purchase of the items such as cars, aerated drinks, and tobacco will be extended beyond 2022. Hey guys, forget COVID and tell me honestly, the automobile sector was facing hell lot of issue even before COVID. Jobs were losing out before COVID in the automobile sector, and COVID added fuel to the fire. Forget the share price that are trading in the NSE, because they are run by operators and we handle separately which company to buy and which company to sell. If I am a state, assuming Delhi, and I borrow from market, it means to pay that amount, I need to add cess on cars, aerated drinks, which is soft drinks, and tobacco. Hey guys, will this not impact negatively on the industry? Now that is confusing me. Because 3 days ago, there was a speculation in the air that the government has decided to reduce the GST on the automobile sector. Okay. Share prices like shoo. But did Treasury Consulting bought? But this information is saying that the cesses on cars, aerated drinks, and tobacco will continue even after 2022. It means case 1 and case 2 is not telling. That conflicts me. To conclude this discussion, I would like to say that if the states will go either way, no politics, whether you are BJP denominated or you are non BJP denominated, but in either of the cases, the market will feel crowd out. COVID-19 put hell lot of issues in the form of saving, and raising 97,000 or to the tune of 2,35,000 crore is a very big amount. And by the way, the biggest question is not 2,35,000 crore, rather the composition of the 2,35,000 crores, because that determines me the revised debt to GDP ratio of the states. And currently, in the absence of the data, I cannot comment. And more importantly, that also tell me the impact on these three sectors, because if I'm going to have that option, I have to increase the cess. This is part 1 of the GST issue. We will continue to short more parts as soon as we will get more information about this in the public domain. But I strongly believe that the center should not let the states to borrow, rather center should borrow himself, because this is having multiple positive than negatives versus the states borrow. I feel that if center let the states to borrow about the GST shortfall, then this is a wrong precedent, and this precedent may end up with on a negative note than on the positive note in the longer tenor. Because in one of the public articles, I have even read that the people have started raising voice that the earlier taxation system was better, even though your tax was surplus or shortfall, because that tax was state come to the state. It's not rooted by the center. But the biggest point is also that an increment of 14% on the tax revenue on year-on-year basis, at least for the first 5 years, is something very, very optimist assumption. And I do not know till what extent this assumption can be met, because the COVID-19 downfall is not going anywhere. That we all understand. This is Rahul Magan from Treasury Consulting. This is part 1 of the GST issue. More parts will come. You know our WhatsApp 9818485155. Let's see how it shapes up, option 1 or option 2, but the case looks interesting. Have a great day, sir. Thank you.